Let us take a moment to reflect on what life was like when it was, before the SPA, before the single page application. When we had things like MVC and ASP.NET Web Forms on the .NET side, of course, lots and lots of ways to develop websites. But in a traditional HTTP REST request response type application, there is no state. There's no way that unless you want to store cookies or have some way to do it on the server side, like the session object. Everybody's favorite, the session object in ASP.NET Web Forms. It's sort of, it's putting round pegs into square holes or square pegs into round holes or something like that. The things don't fit, right? But with the SPA, it's a little bit easier. If you've done any React or Vue or Angular, even Knockout, a single page application, there's places where you can stuff stuff. So let's talk about that in Blazor. That's what I'm here to talk about, the ways that you can manage state. So first of all, what is state, what isn't state? To me, application state is the things that are sort of transitory, that are in memory, that you need to access from different components that may or may not be in scope, right? The canonical idea that comes to mind is filling out a form. Now, I don't know if you've ever had this wonderful experience, but in the States, I remember I was filling out a form for the bank. It may have been a credit card application or an application for some finance thing or whatever, but they really want like this multiple page form filled out, right? And so, I get all the easy stuff, your name, your address, and your this and the that. And then you get to this page that's like, was your mortgage payment A, B, or C on this particular date? So I'm like, how the hell should I know, right? So I got to get up and I got to go to the file cabinet and I got to pull stuff out. By the time I get back, oh, I'm sorry, you've timed out. Your session has expired. You have to start all over again, right? What an infuriating experience that is, right? So application state in that case will be everything that I've filled into the form up to that point. So when I reload my session, everything is there that I've already done. And, I've also had that experience where they did that for you. And it's like, well, thank you very much. But the alternative is pretty nasty. So when I think of state, I don't think of secrets. I don't think of anything that needs to go in a database. I think of, my name, my address, my phone number, that kind of thing, or just data that I have set to use in the application that I want to be able to access from different places. It could be as simple as a switch, like a toggle switch that I turn on in a toolbar or something like that tells me I want to see some features or something like that, right? And it isn't really a view model either. I mean, when we think of state and objects that we want to know when they've changed, we think of view models and I notify property change. I actually did a Blazor train show, revisiting MVVM, and I asked people like Steve Sanderson and Chris Sainty and Tim Corey and a couple other people I really respect in the business. What do you think about MVVM with Blazor? Jeff Fritz from Microsoft was there, and they're all like, you don't really need it. Steve Sanderson didn't say that. He said, he's very diplomatic. He said, well, we made Blazor to be sort of agnostic to whatever patterns you want to use. We tried to make it as simple as possible so you wouldn't have to, put stuff on top of it. But if you want to, go ahead. Yeah, he's Steve Sanderson. He's diplomatic. He has to say that. But everybody else was like, you don't need MVVM, What you need is to be able to have some properties or, an object that has properties where they're accessible from all the different components and all the different pages in the SPA, and they're taken out of the page itself. So just a little recap about what Blazor is. It is a single page application. There is only one page, even though that when you navigate to different pages, you can see up here at the top the URL changes, but that's a route within the same application. You're not going and getting a whole new set of HTML and replacing it in the browser, right? It is a SPA. It's a single page application. But the problem is, and you can see this right here, and I'm sorry to use the counter, you know, it's there. Everybody's sick of the counter, but you can see if I increment the counter and I move off the page and I go back, it's 0 again. And that's because every time you go to a page or a component and you navigate away from that page and you come back, it reinitializes. And any page level variables that are in there get wiped out, get reset. So let me show you what that looks like. And here's Blazor train, by the way. If you haven't seen this resource in your Blazor developer, you really should. If I sort the videos descending, the last one was episode 77, Revisiting MVVM. So yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff in here that you can use. But if we go back to the application here, and we go to the counter page, you can see that this variable right there, current count, is just a page level variable. And that's why it gets destroyed and reinitialized every time that page gets navigated to. So we can use this as an example of state, but also add a few more things. So I'm going to show you 3 demos here today. The first one, we're going to do application state using a cascading value. If you don't know what that is, you will soon. Second, we're going to use a service that we can create, a class, and add it as a scoped service so that there's one instance per user. And we're going to do that because we might need to handle an event when the state changes because we're doing something other than refreshing the UI. And the third is to take that app state and persist it to local storage so that if you're filling out a form, for example, and your session times out or you come back later, at a certain time, you give it a timeout window, your data will come back to life. So let's start with the cascading value. So I have just a simple Blazor server application here. And all my code in my toolbox is missing. That's awesome. Wow. How did that happen? Do you guys find this happens occasionally? Like your toolbox data goes away and then it comes back and then it goes away? Okay. Shift. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to download from Blazor train. Actually, I don't need to download it. I have the code here. So yeah, I had all these things in my toolbar that that I could just code snippets, and they're gone. So we're just going to do this the easy way. We're going to pull up the application app. Already done. So the cascading parameter type is a cascading value. It's a how should we call it, a component that you wrap around the entire router, the entire app, and then you can initialize that or you can access it in any page or other component just by adding a cascading parameter. So in my shared project, here's my cascading app state. Now this is Blazor server, but it would work just as well on Blazor WebAssembly, right? There's no difference. So here's a pattern you might see when you want to have a component that wraps content, that wraps markup. You have a cascading value for this component, and you have a render fragment. I call it child content, and it's a parameter. And that child content goes inside this cascading value. Now, on this component, I've got some properties. I've got a counter property, and the only difference between this and a regular getter, a regular setter, is that when I set the value, I call state has changed. And state has changed is something that you call to tell Blazor that, hey, this page needs to be re-rendered, or this component needs to be re-rendered. It's actually at a component level. And so anything inside the child content will be re-rendered. Okay? Message is just a string, and we call state has changed again when we set the value. And the same with this Boolean property, enabled. Okay? So now if I go to AppRaiser, I can wrap my entire AppRaiser, the router, this is what was there beforehand, in this cascading app state component. All right, and now let's create a toolbar component, which I've added to the shared folder. And this has a cascading parameter, not just a parameter, but a cascading parameter called cascading app state. And the name of it is app state. But this basically says, okay, I want to have a reference to that instance, and there's only one instance per user. Okay? So here I just have some markup, and I'm looking at app state enabled, and I'm showing a button that's going to be green that says enabled if it's enabled, and otherwise I'm showing a button that says disabled that's going to be red. Now I've also got another button called update message, and when I click that, it calls this update message button clicked, which sets app state message. Now I don't have to do any notify property changed or anything like that. I just set the message because in the setter, I'm calling status changed wherever it is. Message updated at the current date time. Then, if we go to main layout, instead of the regular about box that I have normally across the top, I'm showing the toolbar right there. That's the only difference there. And now let's go to the main page, the index page, and look at that. And I've also got my app state reference here. So remember, this is a reference to the same instance. There's only one instance per user, right? So here's my app state, and I have a button to toggle enabled, which basically sets it to the opposite of what it is, and another one to set the message. So now I can set the message in the toolbar, which is always visible no matter what the page is, and I have a button to change the message in the main page as well. So let's check it out. All right, so here's my enabled toggle. You can see that this button right here is changing. If I update the message, I can do that from the page, and I can also update it from the toolbar. In the toolbar, no matter where I am, I can update it and show it, right? And if I go back to the home page, the message should say 10:34:31. And it does. Now I also have this child component, and just to show you that we can go down a level, I created a child component also exposing app state, and we're setting the message from there as well. So this is a child component that's going to be on the main page. Now, we're not displaying it, but we could. We certainly could. We just have we're setting the message to message updated by child component. So, boom, there you go. So now we've got a page, a child component, and another component up at the top, the toolbar, that are all accessing the state. And I also have rewritten the counter page. So instead of the counter being a local variable, it's app state counter. And here's the value of that, such as it is. I could set the counter here like 6 or 7. I can go to another page and come back, and it's still there. And the code for that is just what you'd expect. Yeah, I've got another app state instance, not instance, but reference in there. Okay, so this is where I would start with app state. I would start with a cascading value. And the restriction is, or the use case is, the only thing I need to do is update the UI, okay? If all you need to do is make sure that this component can update the UI or read the value of something, right? Great. But what if I want to act on, when another component that's not me changes the state, okay? Now you need to have an event handler. And it's not that simple, because let's say we implement an event handler in this cascading app state, right? So we have to have a dispose method, right? Because we have to unhook it when we're done. And how do we know who mutated the state? How do I know if it wasn't me, right? So let's say that you want to do something like, write to a log or something like that in the toolbar when the state changes. All right, so you hook the event, but what if the toolbar was the one that changed the state? Do you know what I'm saying? So you have to think about not getting into a quagmire with your code. And so there's another way that we can do this, and that's with a scoped service. So let's open that demo. Any questions on this one while I'm opening the new one? No, it just re-renders the component that when you call state is changed, it's within that component. Yeah. So let's look at this guy. We've got, in a services folder, we've got a class called appState. So appState has a message property, an enabled property, and a counter property, and I've got private setters on here because I want to control how these things get set. I don't want to simply have a public setter because I need to know who mutated the state. If it wasn't me, great, I can take some action, right? It's just a little extra bonus that I put into this architecture. So I've got a notify state changed method that takes a component base or a component. So you could use this from inside a component or a page, and then the property name. And then I'm invoking this event state changed if it's not null. In other words, if somebody's handling it, I want to invoke it. Passing the source and the property. So here's my event. It's an action of component base and string, state changed. So now I have some public methods for updating those values rather than just being able to say, message equals or enabled equals or counter equals. So I have update message, update enabled, update counter. So they're able to do the sets because the setter is private. And then we're going to call notify state changed. So we still have this toolbar, right? But the toolbar is going to inject the app state. And before you can inject, and this is an older demo, so we're using the startup. In configure services, you add a scoped service. And a scoped service is different from a singleton in that you get one instance per user. If you add singleton like weather forecast service, you're sharing one instance with all users. Okay? And this is in Blazor server. Blazor WebAssembly, there's no difference because there's only one user. All right? So we're adding app state as a scoped service. We're injecting it into the toolbar. We're implementing iDisposable because down in onInitialized, we're handling state changed with this guy right here, app state changed. And we're in dispose, we're unhooking it with minus equals. But you can see right here, if source is not this, then somebody else mutated the state. It wasn't the toolbar. And then I can take, right here, all I'm doing is calling state has changed. But you get an event, right? You can do something that's non-UI related, like a log or, something else. Follow? So that's why this is a completely different model from the cascading parameter. If you're wanting to use a cascading parameter or cascading value, the only thing you can really do is, update, right? Or whatever you can do in that setter, right? But do you really want to do anything in that setter? Well, that's up to you. So if a component needs to know when the state has changed and who changed it, this is a good model. Likewise, in the index page, we're doing the same thing. We're injecting app state, implementing disposable, same code as before with the child component. And instead of saying enabled equals, we're saying app state update enabled this, passing this, and app state enabled. Not app state enabled. Same with the message. So we create a message. We call app state update message, passing this and the message. And counter the same way, right? Injecting the app state, disposable, update counter. There you go. And the child component. The child component doesn't need to know when anything is changed because we're only setting the value, but we're setting it with the update message. Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah, the question is, can we see that app state again? Here it is. Sorry about that. Yes, so here it is. So update message sets the message property, which has a private setter, and then calls notify state changed. So anybody who's hooking that event can see it. Okay, so this should work exactly as it did before, right? The only difference is now we could actually, in, let's say, toolbar, put a breakpoint here. And if the, say, child component of the page updates it, hang on, let me make this better. If I update it, everything gets ignored. But if the page updates it, now I get control. Now I can do something in the toolbar. Yep. And I know that the source is the page. I know you can't see that, but it's application state page pages.index. Application state's the name of my app. Questions? Other questions? Yeah.
One of the benefits of the second approach is that the state has changed folders are going to be more localized to places where the content is being changed, rather than just updating the whole. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so the main benefit of the second of this scope service is that you can get control and you can have an event handler in another component. That's the main. It's not really about updating the rendering. I'm doing I'm doing this because it has to be done anyway, you know. And but it's not about that. It's really about getting control when something changes, which you don't get with a cascading parameter. Other questions? Okay. Let's try this other one here. Yes? Yeah, that's a good question. Can you have more than one app state class? Yes, of course. I was of the mind, and I still am, that you can put everything in one state bag if you're just going to have a single app state. But if you've got like a whole bunch of things that do different things, you might want to break them down by task, right? Which is sort of the Redux way of doing things, isn't it? You have every task that you want to do has a state. It gets more complicated, but you certainly have the ability to do that if you want. It's just a service, it's just a scope service, so you can have one for every different task that you want to do. It's just more work because now you have to implement it where you want and not where you don't want. Yeah. Great question, though. All right, so let's talk about persisting app state. So this is that example that I was telling you about where you're filling out a form and, you run out of time and your session expires and you have to do the whole thing over again. How horrible. And it truly is. So for this demo, I'm using a tool that Chris Sainty wrote, and Chris is here at NDC, and he's doing a talk, or he did a talk. He's written a lot of tools. He's written a lot of great components, open source components for Blazor. And one of them is local storage, Blazor local storage. Right here, Blazor local storage. And it's a NuGet package. You just Google it, you'll find it. And what I'm doing with this is I'm using it to serialize the state and to store it in local storage. Now, local storage, you get 5 megabytes per URL per user, right? So that's all you get. So it's not like you're going to stuff, 1,000 records in there. That's not what it's for, right? You get 5 megabytes. So here I have a little bit of a different architecture. I still have a cascading value, but this time the cascading value has an app state property. So I have both in one. And the reason I have both in one is I don't want to serialize the cascading app state provider. I just want to serialize app state. Now, I wrote this in .NET 5 when the state of system text JSON was such that you couldn't serialize properties with private setters. And you could do it with Newtonsoft JSON. So and you can still do it with Newtonsoft JSON. So this is what you have to do. You have a private setter on a property, you have to set it as a JSON property, which means it will be serialized even though it has a private setter. So that's why I'm using Newtonsoft JSON. But check this out. So app state has the message, the enabled, the counter, but it also has a time to live in seconds. So this is our timeout for storing the app state in local storage. And I just have it set to 60 seconds to be able to demonstrate up here that if I wait 60 seconds, which is easy to do on stage during a demo, it will no longer be available. But in the real world, you're probably going to want that to live for, what, a day, 2 days, 2 hours? I don't know. That's up to you. And then a date time for last accessed, because I want to compare that, obviously, to the time to live in seconds. How much time has elapsed since I last accessed this? Now the rest of this, update message, update enabled, update counter, and notify state, it's all the same as in the service that we had. So you'll notice that we're not injecting it as a service because it is hanging off of the cascading app state provider, right? Here's my local storage service. And you can see here that I'm calling, wait a minute, let me close this. Calling local storage service get item as string async, app state JSON. And then I'm looking to see if it's not null. And again, this is older code, so it's not as efficient as it could be today. I'm deserializing the object, and then I'm looking at last accessed, checking the date time, and if it is within the window, I'm setting app state to that object. Otherwise, I'm instantiating a new app state. Now I have a save changes that's synchronous and one that's asynchronous. We're setting last accessed is now, serializing the object, and then storing that in local storage. And just in case you need a link to something that shows you how much local storage you have, and guess what? It's 5 megabytes. Here's the link. Again, the app Blazor, we put the cascading app state provider around it. And, you know, our toolbar looks very much the same, right? Except that when state has changed, we're going to save it right here in the toolbar. And this is the only place we're going to save it. Even though we're accessing it in the index page, we're not going to save it there, right? We're just going to invoke state has changed. So let's do this demo. Value cannot be null. Yes.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't have a save be the responsibility of the app state storage?
Is there a reason why I wouldn't want to have the save in of the state itself? Oh, yeah, because you can't deserialize yourself and replace yourself. That's why. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I already, what's occurring to me here is I get this error, cannot be null, is that it might be this guy right here is something that's already living on my, in my application here. So let's just change that. One more time. That's awesome. That's so awesome. All right, let's see here. I can figure this out. Let's run it one more time. I'm going to use this really awesome tool called debugging. Breakpoint. We're going to put one right there. And by the way, oh yeah, okay, so this is actually a WebAssembly application. That's why. That's what's going on here. And I might not actually get that breakpoint because it's a WebAssembly application. Value cannot be null. Parameter input. Yeah, this is awesome. Just great.
I'm not sure if it's related. You haven't registered the app state class in DI.
No, I didn't need to do that because it is a parameter of
If you inject it into the
No, we're not in the, sorry?
Still injected in the cascading.
Let me check. I didn't think I did. I don't think I had to because it is a property. Oh yeah, I'm injecting local storage. Yeah. That's great. Input. Yeah, it builds no problem. All right, let's see if I can do something else here. John, you have a repo I can download that does this? Storage, right? All right, let's try. Let's go back to Blazor Train and download it again. Oh, I know what I can do. Get this. Show a video of it working. Yes, I can. Persisting app state. So we're going to go toward the end here.
Hi, I'm Carl Franklin.
Hey, Carl Franklin, how are you? Let's go toward the end. And
Create it. It's exactly, it's within what's
All right,
toggle
here we go.
enabled. That's 113 bytes, by the way. We can update the message here, update it in the child component, just like we did before. Now let's close the app and run it again within 60 seconds. And there it is. This is exactly the way we left it.
so you're going to have to trust me.
Now let's close it again.
And look, 90 seconds later.
At the default values.
There you go. All right. So there's one other thing I want to bring to your attention, which is new, is kind of new to me because I was never really a Redux person, but there's a tool called Fluxor, and I have a managing app state with Fluxor, which uses the flux pattern, but it's all C#, and it's all for Blazor. So anybody do Redux in React? So it's that pattern. It's the same flux pattern where you have a state and you have a manager and you've got a store and then you have a dispatcher and there's a lot of stuff and there's a lot of steps in here. But it does work and it is really cool. And I guess the whole reason that you would use this is the state is immutable. So rather than just changing the state from somewhere and then getting, knowing who changed it, right? Like I do, you replace the state and you have the prescriptive architecture is, as you said, to have different state stores for each task that you want to perform, right? So whereas, you might have one for adding something to your shopping cart, that's a completely separate state bag, if you will, and it's a completely separate store because it only deals with those things. If you want something that is shared among, a task where different components have to know when that state changes, then those guys can handle the state in there without fear of stepping on each other. I don't know. I'm not convinced that this is a really good way to go. It's a bit complex. And, my colleague, Don Webier from DevExpress also feels the same, that it is cool, but it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff there. So I would start with the cascading option. And if you need to get control beyond, if you need to hook an event when somebody else mutates the state, then you could use the service, the scope service. If you want to persist it, you can use both. You can have the app state service hanging as a property off of your app state provider, which you can then use to serialize and deserialize that and store it somewhere. It doesn't have to be local storage either. It could be, you know, in a database. It could be in a cookie, I guess, if you really want to. It could be in a SQLite database, you know. So that is pretty much it. I mean, if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to take them now. No?
The largest thing, probably offline stores, things that they're about index DB being very limited. Is the, sorry, not index DB, but SQLite versus index DB, which is probably better for the largest thing. So,
Yeah. Which is better, IndexedDB or SQLite? IndexedDB has been classically the way people go, but SQLite is kind of like the new hotness with Blazor. I don't know. Does anybody else have an opinion on that? I haven't used either, really, so with Blazor. Anyone? Yeah? Yeah, I think if you're getting more than 5 megabytes of state, you might want to reconsider what's going in there, but I have no idea what your application is, so I don't know. Yeah, you might want to use a database on the server side instead. Anybody else? Questions? I have a question. How come I can't get heavy cream in London anywhere? Double cream, yeah. How come I can't get that? Yeah, I know, but the baristas, like the coffee places, they're like, why would you want that? All right, whatever. All right, well, that's my talk. You're getting out a little early. Thanks.